Thank you very much for this warm welcome. Thank you very much for the invitation. And disculpe que no voy a hablar en español porque simplemente me falta un poco la práctica. So I'm going to speak in English about the role of community power as a global key driver for more wind power, at the end for a more sustainable energy system around the world. I must say that I've been already quite inspired by several of the presentations that we've heard, and it's really an honor to be here, also to be able to contribute to the discussion here. I'd like to give you an introduction to our association, which was created in Denmark 8 years ago, and since July 2003 we have our head office in Bonn, not far away from the United Nations campus, so there are some other UN organizations are based there, like the United Nations Climate Secretariat. We have, at this point of time, more than 400 members from around the world. It's covering 91 countries. The kind of key members are the national wind energy associations. We have also companies, we have scientific institutes, we have public bodies, we also have some individuals. So these 91 countries, that's also quite interesting number because it's more countries than are at this point of time using wind energy on a commercial basis. That indicates already that there's a very huge interest in wind energy from all corners around the world. Our aim as World Wind Energy Association is, of course, promotion of wind energy worldwide, with the overall aim of coming to a 100% renewable energy supply system with wind energy as one cornerstone. And we are trying to promote the utilization of wind energy by being a communication platform, bringing people together from around the world so that they can communicate, exchange information, experiences, by what you might call lobbying on the global level, on the international level, advising national governments and international organizations in favor of wind energy. And one important aspect here is enhancing international technology transfer in a very broad sense. That means we have, of course, in many countries, we have already a lot of experience in technology, but also in policies. And there are other countries that are starting, and we want to help that this know-how can be transferred and can also be made available in other countries. We have some activities, like we do once every year a World Wind Energy Conference. We have working groups on sustainability guidelines and repowering, hybrid systems, small-scale wind turbines, etc. Yeah, as I said, we are actually in contact with many governments and, well, advising them how to set up favorable legislation for wind. We are then beyond our network, as I said, working with international organizations, and we have official status at the United Nations. It's called special consultative status. We are also represented on the REN 21 steering committee. That's the global network for renewable energy policy. And we have supported the establishment of the International Renewable Energy Agency. It's a very great achievement, maybe the most important achievement this year, that January this year, almost 100 countries or representatives from almost 100 governments came together in Bonn, and 75 out of them actually signed the statutes, the founding statutes for this International Renewable Energy Agency. In the meantime, it's already 78 countries. We also work together with the other global international renewable energy associations in the International Renewable Energy Alliance, because we think that wind alone cannot deliver. We need to have a mix of the different renewable energy sources. So we work with the International Solar Energy Society, International Geothermal Association, International Hydropower Association, and then recently was created a World Bioenergy Association. This is a world map where you see the dark blue countries are the countries where we do have our members, and the flags are where we had our World Wind Energy conferences. So we started in Berlin and then went to South Africa, and then Beijing 2004, Australia it was 2005, 2006 went to New Delhi in India, 2007 was Argentina, last year was under the special theme of community power in Canada, and now soon we will go to South Korea. In 2009, that will be in June. 2010 will be Turkey, and 2011 again Africa, that will be Egypt. Well, short question, why do we need 100% renewable energy? And then again coming to this, back to the world map, but different perspective. Many of you might know this picture that shows at first that we're living on one planet, one Earth. It shows that we're using energy. It shows also that some people seem to have better access to energy than others. There are some parts, especially in Africa, which are quite dark, although there are still many people living there. So that's one kind of basic motivation. Some questions are raised here, and already some answers are indicated in this picture. The next world map again shows something to do with the previous map, that there are, especially in Africa, also in large parts of Latin America and Asia, large parts of population without access to electricity, to modern energy services, and that has of course major implications for their quality of life, for their health system, for economic wealth. Another aspect when we have a look at this question of why renewable energy is, this has been shown already today, the consequences of today's fossil energy utilization. So you see on the one slide the CO2 concentration in the last 50 years in Hawaii, and then in parallel, of course, well known, caused by this increase in CO2 concentration, the rise in global average temperature in the last 150 years. So this again is an indication that the current energy supply system is not sustainable, but leads into kind of catastrophe if we continue. Another important aspect has been raised in the previous presentation today. That's the case of security of energy supply, or the dependence on imported raw materials for energy. And that's an example from Europe. Well, in Europe, if we continue the energy supply like it is still today, then the dependence on imported energy resources like oil and gas and coal will increase dramatically. This is something, of course, which has implications, as we know. It's a matter of also economic prospects in the future. Also has a lot to do with, we don't know what the prices will be. And one important aspect of this is that, especially in the case of oil and gas, we rely more and more on few regions where these resources are concentrated. So what we can see clearly is that emission-free renewable energies like wind are key technologies for sustainable development because they provide secure energy supply, they are important for climate change mitigation, they reduce emissions like CO2, also other emissions like dust. They contribute to avoid conflicts around limited fossil resources. They provide stable energy prices, and they actually can contribute to stabilize economies because they are a low-risk investment. I'll talk a bit more about this a bit later. But this is, of course, at this moment of the global economic crisis, a very, very important aspect too. Now, let us talk about the resources that we have. And this is a study which was done by Stanford University 4 years ago. So the question, do we have enough wind resources around the world? And now I think read this because it's very clear. Assuming that statistics generated from all stations analyzed here are representative of the global distribution of winds, global wind power generated at locations with mean annual speeds of more than 7 meters per second at 80 meters. And I should say that many sites that we use today have wind speeds lower than that. Then the capacity would be around 72 terawatt worldwide for the year 2000 that referred to. And if we only capture 20% of this power, it would satisfy 100% of the world's energy demand for all purposes, over 7 times the world electricity needs. And this does not even include offshore sites, and again, it does not include the sites with less than 7 meters per second. And like country where I am living, Germany, Most sites there that are used today for harvesting wind have an average wind speed of less than 7 meters per second. So there is no doubt there is an abundance of wind there. Again, this study is based on measurement. It's not theory. That's what we know about the wind resources worldwide. Now, let us come to the real development in global installed wind capacity. You see the development here in the last 10 years. So in bit more than 10 years, we have an increase of 15 times. We have, end of last year, we had 121,000 megawatt of installed wind capacity worldwide. 10 years ago, it was around 10% of that. 1999, you see here 13,700. So it's a quite impressive development, and the share in the global electricity consumption is a bit more than 1.5% at this point of time. The top countries worldwide are United States, which took #1 position just last year from Germany, followed by Spain, which has performed very well in the last years. The most impressive success story of the last 2-3 years is China, which in the last 3 years doubled their installed capacity. And this year it's expected to be the #1 market in terms of new installations. So we expect that up to 10,000 megawatt of new capacity will be installed in China in this year. India was for a long time the #1 country amongst the so-called developing or emerging countries and the leading country in Asia. They still have an important role as #5. You see that these 5 markets are the 5 most important markets. Of course, we should mention Denmark here, which is #9. It was in a leading position for quite a long time, but Denmark is still leading in terms of share in the overall electricity supply. Denmark, around wind energy, covers around 20% of the electricity supply. Here you see, it's a screenshot of the website of the Danish national grid operator, Energinet.dk. You can always have a look at this. That was taken, as you see, September the 15th, 2007, shortly after midnight, and you see here that at that point of time, I think I can use this here, the electricity consumption in Denmark was 3,060 megawatt, and wind turbines contributed 2,125 megawatt. That's more than 2/3. And so you see that at that point of time, it's like 70%. The grid was still stable, so some people say such a share, or they've been telling us since many years, such a share of wind power is not necessary, is not possible. The grid was stable, they still had enough electricity, and they saved a lot of other fuels. I recommend you to have a look at this from time to time. It's very impressive. I know that similar statistics are available also for Spain, and but Denmark, of course, with a higher share, even more impressive. Now we come to the installations by, again, you see here the shares by country, but what I also like to refer you to when we have a look at the global situation, the continental shares of total installed capacity. What you see here is that Europe is still dominating the world market with more than half of the wind turbines installed in Europe, and well, followed by North America and Asia, but together they are accounting for far more than 95%. You see the development here of the continental shares of new installed capacity. In Europe was leading by far only 5 years ago with more than 70%, and this went down to around 1/3, now similar to the share of North America and also Asia. That's the green line. So these 3 world regions have now similar shares. That's, I mean, from a European perspective, should encourage Europeans not to lose more market shares, but to do more so that the technology leadership, which obviously Europe still has, is not lost to other world regions. What this also tells us is, of course, that Latin America and Africa especially were, different from Australia Pacific. the share of the people that are living there compared to of the world population is relatively small. So I think the 2.5%, that's still kind of acceptable. But Latin America and North Africa, with less than 0.5% of the new installed capacity, there's a lot which remains to be done there. And we have a look at the statistics on jobs worldwide. The wind industry today employs, well, today it's almost 500,000, so it's increasing similar like the installation numbers, and we expect that end of next year will be 660,000 jobs worldwide. And that's still taking into account the current situation where the global economy goes down and there's this economic and financial crisis. The forecast for the global installations, and that's a rather conservative prediction, which we've done, is that in the year 2020 we will have installations worldwide of 1.5 million megawatt. So that's, again, as I've said, it's rather conservative. It's based on the predictions and the known projects that we get from our member associations. Here I'd like to present you a scenario or a study which was published by the Energy Watch Group. That's a group of independent researchers from different countries. And the lead author of this was Rudolf Rechsteiner, who is a Swiss parliamentarian and economist. And he worked out different scenarios for the development of wind power in the next years. So scenario, or the parameter which he changed was basically the world electricity generation growth rate in the next years, assuming that it would continue like in the past 10 years at the rate of 3.6%, or scenario C and D, that this would be only half the rate, 1.8%. That means every year the electricity generation worldwide would grow by 1.8%. I mean, with the economic crisis today, we can rather assume that it will be 1.8%, that will go down a bit. At the same time, the other parameter that he looks at is the growth of the annual additions of wind power, and we saw in the last 10 years around 30% increase. We assume that this will continue in the next years. This year might be a bit lower, but we expect that it will continue like this. And so one or two scenarios would be with just steady growth rate in wind, and the other two scenarios with half the growth rate. So kind of business as usual, or business as we've seen so far, continuous development would be scenario A, which just development continues in the next 10 years like it was in the previous 10 years. And that means that in the year 2018, there would be the peak of non-renewable power generation, and from then on, non-renewable power generation will go down. That would mean that in the year 2040, there would be no non-renewable power generation anymore. And that means that the CO2 emissions would be below the Kyoto benchmark in the year 2031. So that's actually quite encouraging. When you have a look at the scenario C, which might even be more likely at this point of time, that means that in the year 2014 already, we would have the peak of non-renewable power generation. And what we know, not only from Spain, as we heard already today, in many parts of the world, in Europe, also other countries, the renewable investment in renewable energy power generation capacities is higher than in non-renewable power generation capacities. This is basically from the same study, but just as graphics. So you see the green. These are the four scenarios: A, B, C, D. A is the scenario, kind of this continuous development, continuous growth rates. Green is the investment in renewable generation capacities. Black is in non-renewable generation capacities, and that means that here, from the year 2022 on, new investment would only be done in renewable power generation capacities. And the kind of worst scenario still here in the year 2038, which is 30 years from now, from then on will be no more non-renewable power generation investment. What does this mean in actual numbers for wind solar? That would mean that in the year 2040, the capacity of wind energy and solar, that would be more than 25 million megawatt. Now, let us come to another aspect of this renewable energy generation system. When we talk about renewable energy, that means, of course, quite fundamental change of the energy supply structure, moving away from a centralized power station, a centralized structure, to a decentralized, because you need, of course, to replace 1,000 megawatt nuclear or coal power station, you need many wind turbines. That's very obvious. So one implication of this is, of course, that more people can see the wind farms than the one central power station. This is something we have to take into account, we have to consider, as we know from many places around the world that has some serious consequences. That's, if you want, a rather negative approach. The kind of positive approach is that also this kind of economic activity leads to benefits. That means there's additional value generated in a much more distributed way. And that's one of our basic principles as World Wind Energy Association, where we say that local and rural communities and people should be involved and should benefit directly from wind farms, from the installations. There are many, many benefits, of course, coming from wind farms. It starts with land lease for the landowners, so they will have, just for landing their land, they will receive income. That means, of course, that there can be a kind of participation investment in the wind farm. It means that there will be jobs created, local jobs, there could be taxes. And actually there was just not that long ago in Germany a quite important amendment of the taxation was done, or change in taxation was done. So far the taxes from wind farms went to the municipality where the operator, the company, which is usually a company, also even if it is like a cooperative wind farm, then would go to the income would go to the tax would go to the municipality where the company is registered. Now they changed this, and 70% of the tax income will go to the municipality where the wind farm is based. And that's, of course, very important for the acceptance, the local acceptance, because for local politicians, they will see much better the benefit when they see that there will be tax income for it. But there are many benefits. It's also like, I mean, in some parts of the world, it's simply that people will have electricity. We're talking about countries like in Africa. You know, we know from South Africa that where they're starting some community power projects because there is also no electricity available at this point of time. So this whole shift from, let me say, conventional, traditional power system to renewable power or a system based on renewable energy, that actually leads to also a paradigm shift, an economic and social paradigm shift. Conventional power system, we have economically, socially, also ecologically high risk for many and profit for few, centralized for big companies, and a community-based power system based on renewable energy means that there is low risk because, of course, there are some risks involved in wind turbines. Wind turbine can fall down, and if somebody stands there, then this person might be hurt or even killed. We don't know many examples, or actually I don't know any cases where this happened. Or I know one case, actually, yes, of the around 100,000 turbines that we have, which was a prototype where actually, yes, the turbine fell down, and there were a person inside the tower, and so this person was injured. But the risk is, of course, very low. So one person out of 100,000 megawatt or 120,000 megawatt, we talk about, of course, nuclear energy. This was presented sufficiently today, what the risks are. The risks are much, much higher. And when it's done in a way that it's based on community power, that means that people can invest directly. That means also that the profit, the benefits are distributed much better. Profit for many, low risk for many. Difference, high risk for many, profit for few. We talked about, or we heard about this morning about the crisis in which we are, the environmental or climate crisis, the energy crisis and the finance crisis, and I think the underlying crisis here is the crisis that we have is a kind of crisis of responsibility, or maybe even crisis of democracy, because decisions today in our economic systems, not so much in the political systems, but in economic systems, are in many cases done in a way that they are too far away from the impacts or the places of impact. So that means if a person decides which fuel to take, then it does not mean that this person is directly affected by it. And now we are in the situation like the big oil companies, they are responsible for, or coal companies responsible for climate change, and they are not really taking they are not really responding to this. So in this sense, we talked about more democratic energy system where people are more directly involved. The responsibility of the decision takers is closer to where the impacts of the decision will in general make our way of life more sustainable and more democratic. So I think what we have to go for is certainly, when we see the need why we have to go for wind energy, for renewable energy, there's been some talks about also Spain that some people don't like the wind turbines, and in the UK especially they call it NIMBYs, not in my backyard. Well, wind, that's okay, but not in my backyard. And I think what we need to achieve as part of this paradigm shift is that people say, please, on our land. We come together as a pool, we pool our efforts, and we do it on our land. We want it because we see the benefits. So how can we do it? How can we organize a more democratic, a more community-based energy supply structure? And there are different forms of community involvement. We can see this around the world. Of course, the world is quite diverse, and so there are many, many different approaches how it can be done. Of course, easiest one is cooperative ownership, can also be ownership by municipality, can be that just also an investor offers shares to the local population. That happens, or happened in some parts of Germany, that there are special shares reserved. It's also important to look at other parts of the, not only ownership, but also community involvement, that there is an early involvement of the affected communities in the planning process, that there are jobs created locally and the taxes are paid locally. Can be something like sponsoring local activities, and there are many other benefits of ways of involving the local communities, but it has to be clear that those people that are living next to the wind farms, that they see the direct benefits. Otherwise we will run into bigger and bigger problems because, again, people see them. If they say, well, I see them, I don't like them, it's very difficult to discuss, of course, whether you like something or not, just how it looks like. But if they see it as something that does not belong to them, then it's much, much more likely that they would say, we don't want it, we will resist. And as I've heard is that in Spain now there is also, this is creating also problems also because the whole process for getting building permit for wind turbines, especially for these smaller projects, is getting now too long. And that makes it even more difficult somehow than to build turbines in with this kind of decentralized approach. We have some success stories around the world. I think we can learn something. I would never say, oh, just see and do the same, but there's always some elements that can be transferred and applied elsewhere. The pioneer country, without doubt, is Denmark, where around 200,000 families have invested, have owned shares in wind cooperatives and wind farms. Germany, it's around 200,000 to 300,000 shareholders. It's not always cooperatives, also some other investment models. There are now community projects known in Canada, in the United States. Latin America has a long tradition, not necessarily in wind cooperatives, but in electricity cooperatives. And these cooperatives that are already existing, they start now also to look into wind energy as an option. Very exciting is the development now in South Africa. We've got just recently a few new members, community-based projects, and South Africa really has some serious challenges, economic challenges to overcome. And for especially remote communities, these kind of approaches offers great prospects for the future. The first community projects are coming up now in Australia, in Scotland. Great to hear that this project is now on its way in Spain, and I wish you all the best for this. Sweden, that's another country where there's a tradition of energy cooperatives which are already investing in wind energy. So there is a lot that we can learn from each other, and everybody who is interested in this can contact us, of course, and then we can bring you in contact with other similar projects around the world. It's of course important that this shift is accompanied by successful by policies or favorable policies, and I think we've learned some lessons around the world which policy principles have been successful. The first, in general, that is important for wind energy is of course that we have to create a level playing field, close the price gap which is still there in some cases due to the distorted market and the non-internalized external costs like CO2 emissions, like nuclear waste, or the danger of nuclear proliferation, or it's not been mentioned so often today, the danger of a nuclear accident. That's actually something really serious. And I remember very well the accident that happened in Chernobyl, when we really didn't know exactly what to do anymore, whether we could drink milk. I mean, I come, as I've already said, from Germany, and this really changed our life. When we heard at first about something happened in Soviet Union, we thought, oh, that's far away, that doesn't really affect us. But then after some days, it started, and people said, well, you should not eat vegetables from your own garden anymore, you shouldn't eat mushrooms from forests. That's still the case in some parts of Germany. Still today, people should not eat more than once every month or so. It's just some parts of Germany, but it's still the case that this radioactive fallout of the Chernobyl disaster has an actual impact on people's life. And I remember also that there was some milk powder, or it was a train full of milk powder that was also radioactively contaminated, and it was standing there for weeks and months, and nobody knew what to do exactly with it, and it had to be disposed. It's more than 20 years ago, and I know that these things are a bit forgotten today, but it's important to have these things in mind when we talk about level playing fields. This is not at all included in our energy bills. So this is something very important. And one part on the global level where we are working, of course, to achieve such a level playing field is that we try to make sure, although I'm not so confident about the success of it, to have a better inclusion of renewable energy in the post-Kyoto agreements. This Kyoto Protocol has, of course, been negotiated at a time when there was not much public awareness about renewable energy. And it's much more focusing on reducing something. That's the logic of this protocol, reducing emissions, than instead of encouraging the solutions, which is clearly renewable energy. And that's creating the problems for renewable energy a bit, because it's easy to understand, on the one hand, to reduce emissions, which is necessary, and have a focus on this, requires quite different means compared with really what we need is an explosion in renewable energy technologies. And unfortunately, the kind of conventional power sector has hijacked these negotiations, and there's too much influence at the moment already on on the Kyoto negotiation or post-Kyoto negotiations. So I'm not too confident, but maybe we can achieve some improvements for renewable energy. That would be one element to come closer to a global level playing field. The second very important policy principle, and this is something which is neglected in many places around the world still, is that the local communities have to be able to benefit directly of the decentralized energy supply. Now also when we talk about, we heard a lot about what will happen in the United States. There's not so much focus on this at this point of time, and I'm sure that Paul Geib will speak about this. Now when US are number one at this point of time in terms of overall capacity, but you have to bear in mind that they have at the moment maybe 1% of the capacity that they will need at the end, maybe even less. So at the moment, in such a big country, to install one wind farm, 200, 300 megawatt, is not that difficult maybe, because Texas has a lot of space. But more and more, also in such a country, we will come to a situation that it will be closer to where people are living. Now we know already in the United States, even in Canada, which has even much more space, that people start to say, no, we don't want it. And if they are not involved, if they really don't understand, and it's a difference for them, they have a wind turbine there, yes or no, but the electricity comes out of the plug and they have no understanding of it, and they are not involved in it, then it will be very, very difficult, maybe even impossible, to install the huge amounts of wind turbines, of solar panels, biogas plants that we will need. So it's really an essential precondition for the success of, at the end, for the future of mankind, because we're talking about climate change, which is the biggest challenge probably at this point of time, that people understand in time that it's not a top-down approach, but it's really rather a broad movement for renewable energy. And we know that there are some policies that can support it. It's a bit this hen-egg problem, of course, because the more political support we have, the easier it will be to invest for many people, and the other way around. But we have to start, and some countries have already started, and we know how we can succeed. And so let's try to help that more and more countries and also regions and municipalities are making sure that their people can benefit. Another very important part of when we talk, especially now, about economic and financial crisis, is the investment structure of wind energy, similar like solar energy. We have a high share of fixed cost of around 80%. That's fixed when you invest in a wind turbine. That means, of course, that you need a high degree of investment security. This, of course, at the same time means that it's very comfortable for an economy to know when you invest in a wind turbine today what the price of the electricity or the cost of the electricity from this wind turbine will be over the lifetime of the wind turbine. So we don't know at this point of time what the price of oil will be even next week. Nobody knows it. I mean, the price went up and down. Last year under $50, now it's $50. What it will be next week, we don't know. What it will be in 5 years, 10 years, probably it will go up. That's likely, quite likely. But when you invest in a wind turbine today, the investor knows the price in 10 years will be in the range of plus minus maybe 10%. Of course, given that it's reliable functioning technology, which is available today on the market. So in this sense, the financial crisis is on the one side a kind of challenge because it's important to get loans. On the other side, we notice already that the finance sector understands this kind of low-risk character of wind turbines, and there is, in the midterm, we expect rather an increased interest in wind energy as an investment opportunity. The other principle that is also important is that we're dealing here, of course, with a natural source of energy. That means that like nature is, also in agriculture, we have different resources at different sites. And that means that the generation costs are different at different places around the world. It's like with agriculture, it's somehow stupid to, if you want to, well, let's take an example from Spain, the vineyards that you have here in Spain, let them compete directly. Just having a look, wine comes out with the vineyards that you have in some places in Germany. You cannot really compare the price. One is great climate, you can produce a liter of wine at very low price. And the other one is where you have very small and you have to climb mountains and so on. But the product is also quite different. And of course, in the wine market, the people understand that there is a different quality also. So they still go for different products. But in the case of renewable energy, we also have to understand that we cannot have a worldwide one price market. And this has to be taken into account when we talk about promotion schemes. So also we talk about wind energy from Morocco, where the wind is much stronger than, let us say, in France. Also, please take into account that there are other benefits, like the jobs that will be then created in France. You need then maybe less strong grids. So an efficient promotion scheme should take these considerations into account. The fifth successful policy principle is wind still, like most of the other renewables, maybe besides from large hydropower, is in most parts of the world a newcomer technology. And it's still obvious that the overall share, as I said, with 1.5%, it's not so bad compared with when we really started on a commercial basis, but it's still a newcomer technology. And that means it's a technology which will take market shares from others. And the others are already in the market arena, and they won't like it that we take their market shares. But that means if we really want to make wind and other renewables successful, then we need to make sure that there is access to the market arena for newcomers. And it's very clear that in many countries around the world, it's independent power producers, it's like community-based investors that they can invest, that they can play, these new players, that they can play a role. There were some, I think it was even Einstein who said that problems won't be solved by those who created the problems. And this is really what we can see at many places around the world. The market for electricity is only a market when you have new independent players, small players that are investing in renewable energy. It also, of course, implies new capacities and industrial capacities that need to be created. It means that people need to be trained. That's what is sometimes called human resources. It means also that administrative structures need to be there. I hear that there are some problems here in Spain also with not so smooth building permissions for not only wind, also solar. All these things need to be smoother in the future, of course. What we've clearly learned, of course, is in the case of grid-connected renewable energy, the most important tool is a well-designed feed-in tariff. And that's very clear also in Spain. I think Spain, Germany, Denmark, in the past, as the leading European countries, they have clearly proven that. What you see here, the effectiveness by policy tool in the European Union is in the last years, by far more than 80% of the installations were installed under feed-in tariff schemes. We had, as I've mentioned already, last year our World Wind Energy Conference in Canada, in Kingston. That was under the theme of community power, and it was amazing. We didn't expect such a huge interest. This was kind of experiment for us because before that we never had such a focused theme. We had 800 participants and there were around 200 presentations. There was a workshop stream on community power. So it was a great success, and one direct outcome of this is that's now under discussion, but we expect it will be adopted by the Parliament soon. It's the first feed-in tariff in Ontario. I have the conference resolution here, which I think it's also on the CD that everybody gets, so I won't read it now, but you can have a look at this and read through it. I think there are some important conclusions of the conference here. It's, of course, focusing on the key role of community-based investment and which policy tools are important for this. So, kind of summarizing, I think that new players, community-based investments, small, medium-sized companies, municipalities, they have to be the driving forces for the renewable energy deployment. And also to create this broad, not only national, international social movement, more democratic, more responsible for a decentralized renewable energy system, so that we get more support, then better policies again. And the purpose of this, that's my kind of final statement. This was done by the President of India during our conference in India 2006. A very clear statement. The crying need, therefore, is to look for renewable energy that alone can ensure sustainable development. Thank you very much for your attention.